On This Week in Enterprise Tech, we have Mr. Brian Chee, Mr. Curtis Franklin back on the show today. Now, have you ever tried to build your own authentication system from scratch? Question is, why? We'll definitely talk about that. Plus, performance on your website is definitely hard. Today, we have Tim Kadlec. He's Director of Engineering and Fellow at Catchpoint. We're going to talk about application monitoring, performance, plus experimenting for your application in the future. Lots of important stuff to talk about, so you definitely should miss it. TWiT on the set.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is TWiT, This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 532, recorded February 24th, 2023. Render time is money. This episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by Melissa. Over 10,000 clients worldwide in industries like retail, education, healthcare, insurance, finance, and government rely on Melissa for full spectrum data quality and ID verification software. Make sure your customer contact data is up to date. Get started with 1,000 records clean for free at melissa.com/twit. And by Miro. Miro is your team's visual platform to connect, collaborate, and create together. Tap into a way to map processes, systems, and plans with the whole team. Get your first 3 boards for free to start creating your best work yet at Miro.com/podcast. And by Worldwide Technology. With innovative culture, thousands of IT engineers, application developers, unmatched labs, and integration centers for testing and deploying technology at scale, WWT helps customers bridge the gap between strategy and execution. To learn more about WWT, visit wwt.com/twit. Welcome to TWiT, This Week in Enterprise Tech, the show that is dedicated to you, the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and that geek who just wants to know how this world is connected. I'm Louis Maresca, your host, your guide through this big world of the enterprise. But I definitely can't guide you by myself. I need to bring in the professionals, the experts in their field. He is our very own senior analyst at MDA. He's the man who eats and sleeps the enterprise and enterprise security. And he's our very own Mr. Curtis Franklin. Curtis, it's great to see you, my friend. How are you this week?
I'm doing very well. It's been a good week. Research had a number of good calls with companies looking at how different companies measure and understand risk, which is something I'm going to be diving into more and more this year. Risk is one of those things that we all talk about, but what's difficult is finding a common language to talk about risk. And so that's one of the big things I'm looking at for the coming year. And it's exciting. It's exciting trying to find a way that all of us can talk about something together.
It's always good to come together. Thank you, Curtis. Great to see you. Well, speaking of coming together, we have to bring in Mr. Brian Chee. He's our resident network expert. He's also the net architect at Sky Fiber, and he's all around tech geek. Cheebert, you're a busy man. You're gearing up for something important coming up soon, right?
Yes, the Central Florida Fair starts this Thursday, and I'm looking forward to that. It's also going to be my very first board meeting. I get officially installed as a board member, so that's going to be fun. And I'm actually really looking forward to really good carnival junk food.
Elephant ears.
Really long. Yeah, elephant ears. That kind of things. It's been a long time since I had any of that, and I'm kind of looking forward to it. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to eat really, really healthy up till Thursday, and then I'm going to have fair food. Ought to be fun.
Sounds good to me. Well, it's great having you guys here. Thanks for being here. Well, we should get started because there's lots to talk about for sure. Now, have you thought about building your own authentication system from scratch? The question you should be asking yourself is why. We'll definitely talk about that. Plus, your company wants to deliver great websites, right? Well, you need to iterate over time and improve the performance and reliability. Today, we have Tim Kadlec. He's Director of Engineering and Fellow at Catchpoint. We're going to talk about application monitoring, performance, plus maybe even some experimentation as well in the future. So lots to talk about here, lots to discuss, so stick around. But before we do, let's go ahead and jump into this week's news blips. Now, I want to start the blips this week for talking about some startups, some small businesses, and just how they're pivoting around the AI wave that's coming. Now, it's interesting to see the direction of the industry as it unfolds. Now, in this TechCrunch article, it talks about a company called Voicemod, and they've been in the field of digital signal processing for over a decade. And if you want to talk about pivots, they actually originally focused on creating and funding sound emojis, funny sound emoji effects and reactions for gamers to augment their voice chats. Now, Voicemod is going to stay in the gaming industry. However, they want to go all in on AI and generative and synthesizing real data and sounds. And in their case, they're actually starting with real-time voice generation. Now, tools to entirely create synthesized or unreal voices in real time to overlay on actual people's voices. Now, this is avatars plus voice changers, if you think about it. Now, we have seen corporations use text to speech, right? We see a lot of those large models happening right now, and they're actually able to generate in a more natural way. But this is actually speech to speech generation. Now, think almost auto-tune for people singing, but completely altering their sound in real time. Almost feels like deep fake technology, but in real time. Now, it brings up a bunch of ethical questions for me. Now, Voicemod acquired an audio effects startup last year called Vorktro Labs, which has been helped them to get closer to and allow them to actually develop text to speech and text to song capabilities, but they're actually able to clone actual musician sounds. Pretty creepy. Now, there's a great tech talk on that as well, so definitely check that out. The technology seems like they've been having a lot of applications, but they're going to start targeting enterprise applications as well. Being able to augment customer service and sales representatives using generative capabilities to provide a more familiar experience to customers for calls and other voice interactions. Now, using data around the customers, they can provide an experience that can be maybe backed by a human, but what they hear is something more familiar, more localized. What do you think of that? Ethical? Maybe even a bit scary.
Well, if you're like many people using Apple systems, you've got something of a smug thing going on when it comes to device security. Rising user counts mean rising risk, though, and some recent research highlighted in a dark reading article shows that at least a bit of that smugness might be completely unjustified. A new class of bugs that could, quote, allow bypassing code signing to execute arbitrary code in the context of several platform applications, end quote, in Apple's iOS, iPadOS, and macOS has been uncovered. Researchers say these new vulnerabilities could allow an attacker to escalate privileges and make off with absolutely everything on a targeted device. Trellix researcher Austin Emmett says that attackers could potentially gain access to a victim's photos, messages, call history, location data, and every other kind of sensitive data to the point of completely wiping data from a device and denying the legitimate owners access to the machine. Now, the vulnerabilities in this class range from medium to high severity, with CVSS ratings between 5.1 and 7.1. For those of you who don't live inside CVSS, those are moderately high, but not absolutely catastrophic. Apple's grouped them into 2 CVEs, and there's no indication that they've been exploited in the wild. The cyber failure in this case arises from NS Predicate. That's a class that enables app developers to filter lists of objects on a device. The problem is that the syntax of NS Predicate is a full scripting language. In other words, through NS Predicate, the ability to dynamically generate and run code on iOS has been an official feature forever. That's according to the researcher Emmett. In proof of concept attacks, Trellix found that an attacker could use NS Predicate to execute code in root level processes that allow entryway into parts of a Mac like, the calendar, address book, photo, and into every piece of hardware, storage, and software on iOS and iPadOS devices. Now, the good news is that the attacker must already have access to a victim's machine to run these exploits, and there are known ways to harden a system against giving that kind of access. More good news comes from the fact that Apple has already remediated the vulnerabilities, a hint to you that you should be accepting all those update your system messages that have been flying around the past few days. Bad news is that these vulnerabilities point out that Apple hardware is not uniquely hardened against vulnerabilities. The perception of greater security comes from the combination of hardware, software, and application provisioning infrastructure, along with user habits that form the greater Apple ecosystem. Break or even badly bend any one of those, and attackers could find themselves inside the walled garden.
I love this article. It's titled The Big Reuse. 25 megawatt hours of X-car batteries go on the grid in California. And this story comes to us from Ars Technica. Well, last week, a company called B2U Storage Solutions announced that it had started operations at a 25 megawatt hour battery facility in California. On its own, that really isn't news, as California is adding a lot of battery power. But in this case, the source of the batteries was a little unusual. Many of them have spent an earlier life powering electric vehicles. The idea of repurposing electric vehicle batteries has been around a while. To work in a car, the batteries need to be able to meet certain standards in terms of capacity and rate of discharge, but the performance declines with use. Even after a battery no longer meets the needs of a car, however, it can still store enough energy to be useful on the electric grid. So it was suggested that grid storage might be an intermediate destination between vehicles and recycling. Well, considering an electric vehicle, news items where customers are hit with massive costs to replace a battery pack is becoming all too frequent. It is my hope that reuse of battery electric vehicle battery packs might provide some sort of trade-in value so that the overall cost of battery replacement stops being close to the cost of a new vehicle. Another pain point is that battery recycling, or lack thereof, quickly negates much of the green value of a typical electric vehicle. Now, keep one thing in mind. The U.S. Forestry Service has been recycling Nissan Leaf batteries for quite a while to power remote ranger stations. My imagination is that I should someday be able to recover some of the value of a vehicle battery pack, either by them being remanufactured into municipal battery storage or maybe even being reconfigured into a residential battery system.
Nvidia has been looking for ways to step up their game when it comes to AI and machine learning. However, large language models like those of ChatGPT require a lot of horsepower, farms of servers, and maybe lots of compute power. Well, Nvidia is looking to reduce the time and the number of devices required to do the compute of this data. Now, according to this CNBC article, Nvidia thinks that they have what they need in their new platform coming soon. And they currently power several AI applications with their $10,000 chip, the A100 as they call it. It's able to perform many simple calculations, which is required for training and using neural network models at scale. Now, hundreds of GPUs are required to train artificial intelligence models like large language models. Now, the chips need to be powerful enough to crunch terabytes of data quickly to recognize patterns. Now, after that, GPUs like the A100 are also needed for inference, or using the model to generate text or make predictions or even identify objects inside of photos. No matter its capabilities, the horsepower required to power new AI technologies means companies require access to a large number of these A100s. In fact, Stability AI, the company that helped develop Stable Diffusion, an image generator, uses around 5,400 A100 GPUs to power its technology. Now, let's put this in perspective for a second. Now, there's some data from research firms that says OpenAI-based ChatGPT models, in fact, inside Bing search, could require 8 GPUs to deliver a response to a question in less than 1 second. Now, if we extrapolate some data from that, that would mean that they would need over 20,000 8 GPU servers just to deploy the model in Bing to everyone, suggesting that can actually cost $4 billion in infrastructure spending. That's why NVIDIA debuted their H100 platform chip last year, which focuses on optimization for transforms used in large language models. It's an increasingly important technique that many of the latest and top AI applications use. Now, this new platform can train over 1,000,000% faster than the previous generation. It's quite fast. That means that corporations will need less chips to produce even more output. And the quest for real-time processing at scale even though it's just started. Personally, I think that ChatGPT and AI investments are pushing the industry in the needed direction to start making some serious progress in the world of AI, and chips like H100 will definitely power it. Well, folks, that does it for the blips. Next up, the bites. But before we get to the bites, we do have to thank a really great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's Melissa. Melissa is a leading provider of global data quality, identity verification, and address management solutions. Today announced its successful partnership with TomTom, a global pioneer in satellite navigation for consumer use. By layering TomTom's comprehensive global address data, location data, and country data on top of its industry-leading data quality, enrichment, and identity verification solutions, Melissa has earned its reputation as the address expert. Multi-language and multi-format support is key to the postal address, as not every country is alike. Now, TomTom ingests country data into one global standardized data set while supporting multiple languages. TomTom handles the various addressing nuances country by country, making the Melissa solution stack efficient and seamless. This capability has enabled Melissa to increase its global support across 240 countries and territories. Greg Brown, VP of Global Marketing at Melissa, said, by adding TomTom's rooftop precision capabilities to our solutions, Melissa customers can rest assured that their data is not only clean and verified, but also pinpoint accurate and high value to business operations. This ensures that restaurants are found, packages are delivered to the right place, on-demand drivers find their passengers, and so much more. Poor data quality can cost organizations an average of $15 million a year. That's a lot of money. The longer that it stays in your system, the more losses your business could accumulate. By leveraging TomTom Maps, points of interest, 7-digit postal codes, address points, and routing API, Melissa provides a best-of-breed address engine critical to business needs worldwide. Since 1985, Melissa has specialized in global intelligence solutions to help organizations unlock accurate data for more compelling customer view. Melissa continually undergoes independent security audits to reinforce its commitment to data security, privacy, and compliance requirements. They are SOC 2, HIPAA, and GDPR compliant, so you know your data is in the best hands. Make sure your customer contact data is up to date. Get started today with 1,000 records cleaned for free at melissa.com/twit. That's melissa.com/twit. And we thank Melissa for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, it's time for the bites. Now, authentication and user management, it's more than just storing username and passwords in a database. Am I right, Curtis?
You're absolutely right, Lou. And, you know, at first glance, you might think that authentication would be pretty simple. Now, it is the bedrock of application and system security, making sure that the people who are trying to log into your system are who they say they are. And as you say, some people say, well, you've got a database of your users with all their credentials. You make sure that what they type in matches the credentials. Boom, you've got authentication. As you point out, it's not that simple. You've got to have a secure database. You have to have multi-factor authentication to make sure that they are who they say they are. And you have to have ways to manage this account. One of the key pieces of security is making sure that when someone leaves the employee of your company, that you take away their user credentials. If they change jobs, you have to make sure that their new privileges match the new jobs. And oh, by the way, that you take away the privileges from the old job. There are all kinds of things that go into this. And for most organizations, it is not what the people in the C-suite like to call core competency. You've got people who write applications. You've got people who maintain applications. You probably don't employ a lot of people who specialize in authentication, unless you're a company like Descope. Now, Descope is a new company that was featured in a recent Dark Reading article, and their whole premise is pretty simple. that developers shouldn't be spending time and resources on authentication and user management if it's not a core part of the service they're building. Now, they say that with their authentication user management platform, the developers can simply go in, create authentication flows, add multi-factor, manage access privileges, all of these without being security experts. Guru Chahal, a partner at Lightspeed Venture Partner, one of the venture companies that gave them money, said, authentication is too important to be done incorrectly, but it's too complicated and time-consuming to be done in-house. That's the basic conundrum, and it's one that Descope says that they can solve. Now, identity attacks are on the rise, and the Descope platform supports different kinds of developers, no-code, low-code, those who like SDKs, those who like APIs. And the nice thing is that if you've got up to 7,500 monthly active users for business to consumer, or up to 50 tenants for business to business applications, it's free. Now, I mentioned that venture capitalist who gave a quote. Descope has raised $53 million in seed funding. For those who don't live in that world, that's a pretty hefty chunk of seed money. And it's got a founding team that's worked together for years, something that venture capitalists really like to see. So, Brian, I'm going to come to you first. You know, we've got all these different ways of building applications. Why shouldn't we expect the development teams just to roll their own authentication programs? Isn't this sort of basic at blocking and tackling for developers?
You bet. And I have seen many, many teams say, I can do better. No code, low code is for lazy programmers. I don't want to do that. Well, here's the problem. What happens if your industry says all of a sudden that passwords and say fingerprint reading isn't good enough? We have to add in pulse detection behind the fingerprint, or we have to make sure there's actually some human heartbeats behind that retina scanner. How do you change that? New technology and changing technology on how you authenticate is going to happen. You know, as we start moving towards zero trust, something's going to change. We're going to start saying, oh, we have to have dongles, or we have to have this or that widget. And large changes, especially when you're changing the base technology, means if you rolled your own, that means you have to drag back your DevOps team, brush off all the notes, try to figure out what they did. You know, what are those variable names? You know, that's a big one. And then rewrite it. In the meantime, how many hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in lost revenue have rolled in your door? I like this in that now you can start adding more building blocks. I was a big supporter of the concept of building block programming a long time ago, you know, back in the Fortran days. I would like bringing in pieces that have been tested, have been stressed, have been, you know, all kinds of this, that, and the other thing. And lots of other people have tested and make sure, it works. So I like the concept of having authentication being done by a company that spent the money, spent the efforts to do the testing, talk to people about what they really need, and being able to use dramatically more complex and more robust authentication than maybe my DevOps team has time and money to create themselves. You know, and for those of you out there, anything is better than .ht access. Come on, people. We need to do better. We need to move towards zero trust. And we're not going to do that if we're trying to reinvent the wheel time and time again.
That's a good point. And Lou, I want to turn to you because, the quote that we gave earlier talked about core competency being part of what an application developer does. From your experience, is designing an authentication system something that is right in the wheelhouse of most application development teams? Is it something that most teams leave to someone else to specialize in authentication to provide, even if it's someone else in-house?
It's a good question. I would say it's definitely not in the wheelhouse of a normal application developer, whether a microservice developer, back-end, or even a front-end developer. I would say that there is a lot of chance that they're not experts and they're going to need to have some specialized people in the organization. I can tell you, like, for instance, I design and architect a lot of microservices, and to be able to hand off authentication tokens between those services so that they can acquire the right data in the context of the right user, that's very complicated stuff. And so being able to handle that and being helped to support by other organizations or by other products is definitely very useful. I did want to comment directly on this company, Descope. They're in a very, I would say, high competitive market, right? We have companies like Okta backed by Auth0. They have Stitch, Transmit Security. I think they're differentiating themselves by allowing them to have this workflow system or their screen editor that allows that kind of drag and drop, non-code based kind of low code, no code solution, so that users don't have to write apps or code to be able to support the scenarios. That would be super useful for organizations who don't really understand it. The problem is, companies like Okta, they have lots of resources and they're already in this space for a long time. I don't see why they can't go build something like this themselves that just kind of overlays on top of what they're already offering. In fact, they have a lot of low code and no code solutions already, like Okta Workflow and stuff like that. So I don't know why. This is a very interesting startup. I just don't think that they're entering a shark infested waters, I guess you could say. And I'm curious to see if they will survive. But it's a great solution. It's a great opportunity to help customers get into the authentication space easier.
I got something. I really and truly think this solution is great for the small and medium business that are still running large apps. Not everybody can afford Salesforce. Not everybody can afford Microsoft CRM. Those have well-developed authentication systems. But if you have to build something yourself, that's when something like this really comes into bear. And I think it's really going to be useful for the IoT teams because those are going to be inherently small and inherently semi-custom. So not having to build an authentication systems means I can much faster meet changing guidelines without having to test, and more test.
That's an interesting point that companies have to test. Companies have to be sure that something like this is going to work. And to Lou's point, I have watched a lot of companies over the years, and one of the interesting things to ask startups is, what's their exit strategy? Because it's going to be one of two things: going public or being purchased. And I have not spoken to this company. I don't know what theirs is. But given those sharks, some of them very large and well-established in the water, wouldn't be surprised if being acquired isn't high on their list of the ways that this comes along and finishes out. Well, that's it for authentication. And I suspect that we've got a really good guest waiting in the wings. Lou, why don't you take us in that direction?
Thank you, Curtis. Yes, we definitely do. Next up, our guest to drop some knowledge on TWiT Riot. But before we do have to thank another great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's Miro. Now, I have a quick question for you. Are you and your team still going from tab to tab, tool to tool, losing brilliant ideas and important information along the way? It happens daily. I can tell you that. With Miro, that doesn't need to happen anymore. That's right. Miro is a collaborative visual whiteboard that brings all of your great work together no matter where you are. Whether you're working from home or in hybrid workplace, everything comes together in one place online. Now, at a first glance, it might seem like just a simple digital whiteboard, right? But Miro's capabilities run way beyond that. It's a visual collaboration tool packed with features for the whole team to build on each other's ideas and create something innovative from anywhere. Now, a shortened time to launch so your customers get what they need faster. Now, with Miro, you need only one tool to see your vision come to life, whether it's planning, researching, brainstorming, designing, and feedback cycles. It can all live on a Miro board across teams, and faster input means faster outcomes. In fact, Miro users report the tool increasing project delivery speed by 29%. That's huge. View and share the big picture overview in a cinch when everyone has a voice and everyone can tap into a single source of truth. Your team remains engaged, invested, and most importantly, happy. Cut out any confusion on who needs to do what by mapping out processes, roles, and timelines. You can do that with several templates, including Miro's swim lane diagram. Strategic planning becomes easier when it's visual and accessible. Tap into a way to map processes, systems, and plans with the whole team so that not only have one view, but have a chance to give feedback as well. If you're feeling meeting fatigue, I know I am, Miro users report saving up to 80 hours per user per year just from streamlining conversations. Now, ready to be part of more than 1 million users who join Miro every month? Get your first 3 boards for free to start working better together at Miro.com/podcast. That's MIRO.com/podcast. And we thank Miro for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, it's my favorite part of the show. We actually get to bring in a guest to drop some knowledge on the TWiT Riot. Today we have Tim Kadlec. He's Director of Engineering and Fellow at Catchpoint. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Thanks, Lou. Happy to be here.
Now, our audience are from all different chapters in their careers, and they love to hear people's origin stories. Can you take us through a journey through tech and what brought you to Catchpoint?
Sure. Yeah. Boy. All right. So I guess, that's probably, I'd always kind of dabbled with it. Mostly I was a geeky kid and decided, I wanted to, have a website so I could write about basketball history, actually, when I was in junior high. And that's how I taught myself HTML. Bought a magazine at a store that was like, teach yourself HTML, read through it and whipped that up. But then never really thought about doing anything with it professionally and didn't touch it for a while after that until I was working at Radio Shack, actually. Quite enjoying that. And then my wife saw a posting for a agency that was looking for an entry-level web developer and suggested I look at that instead. As it turns out, from a longevity perspective, that was the right call. Early on, it was a couple small agencies, learned a lot there. It was really rapid pace. Ended up writing a book, which kind of worked as a catalyst for getting to do a little bit more consulting with some organizations. Got really into performance probably about a little over a decade ago. As I did that, then that kind of led to, me writing more and more, getting to meet more people, got to work at Akamai for a bit, Sneak in the early days, I think when there was maybe, 8-10 people there when I came on. And then kind of when in between all that, doing a lot of performance consulting. So working with a lot of enterprises actually to fix front-end performance issues, get tools up and running, get the processes honestly in place too, to make sure that things were tested and checked. Had the opportunity to come to Catchpoint and work on web page test, which I'd been using for over a decade. So that was a very easy sell.
Fantastic. That's a great journey. I think my first book was HTML for Dummies, and I put it down right away and moved on to something else for years. So you definitely have a lot more experience for me with that on that. But I do want to jump into performance right away, because I think that this is an important thing. Yeah. I run a lot of sites on my side, and I can tell you one thing, like building your own monitoring system. Obviously you can use the performance counters in the browser, and you can build your own thing that acquires the data and then sends it somewhere, and then you have to do your own analytics, and it becomes kind of complex. And you're not always, getting the right data. You're not always getting the right points in your site. What are you seeing organizations doing here? Are they rolling their own solutions like I've tried to do in my past?
Well, you don't see that many do it for long. Let's put it that way. I think there's very few organizations that are rolling their own monitoring and then sticking with it. It's actually fairly common, as a first step. Somebody decides, we can probably do this on our own. We're going to throw a little bit of JavaScript on the page to collect some metrics and shove it into Google Analytics or somewhere else where they can surface it in Grafana. Maybe they're going to run like Lighthouse for some front-end performance checks, and again, shove that to Grafana instance. But they usually don't stick with it because all the things you just talked about, like it's, making sure that you're getting accurate numbers and real world metrics from those results. There's a lot of work that has to happen behind the scenes for that to happen. If you are trying to monitor real user stuff with actually injecting code on your site, it's really easy to cause a lot of performance headaches that way. So there's getting that right. And then honestly, it's also, I think one of the biggest things that companies struggle with even with out of the box monitoring products is, all right, I've got this data, now what, right? Like getting the data and putting it is only part of the problem. The next thing is your team has to be able to look at it and decide what the heck do we do with this information? And, that's where, again, rolling your own puts a lot of that onus on, a couple people in your team to be able to figure that out for you. Yeah. Whereas, some of the out of box, offerings and stuff that are available, some SaaS solutions can actually start to get you, at least a few steps down that path. So
the one thing that I really think that Catchpoint does well is the fact that it helps improve user experiences. I can tell you from experience of building web applications for 15 years is like the fact that customers expect performance to be really good, and it improves over time. They kind of expect that, especially a large web application, that the performance and the experience is very fluid. The whole concept of if it doesn't load in 200 milliseconds, then it's probably, users will leave the page or whatever. And I think the problem is we don't really necessarily understand what experience users are having. Like we don't I know a lot of organizations say, hey, my page is pretty fast, I'm pretty good. Like I don't understand, but I don't think they really understand the type of experience users are having. Sometimes they lose users because of just the performance and the experience they're having. What can organizations do to help with that? Give them the knowledge and the information they need to know what users are running into and where they can improve.
Yeah. I mean, so you hit on it, right? Like look, I geek out on making things faster. I get a sick, weird thrill when everything goes down by another couple hundred milliseconds or whatever, right? But it is important to remember that we don't work on performance or make things more performant for the sake of making it more performant. We do it because it does provide a better experience. I've got a site, WPO Stats, that I've been maintaining with Tammy Everts for a few years. And all we do is we're just collecting business case studies out there that show, demonstratable impact on performance. And there's, studies out there that connect it to everything for your conversion rate, bounce rate, engagement, your server bandwidth bills, like literally everything you could possibly think about. Just how many even visitors. Like one of my favorite stories comes from YouTube, where they, experimented, rolled out like a YouTube Feather, a super lightweight version of their video page. And what they found out as a result was that they ended up getting traffic from countries that they had never gotten traffic from before because YouTube was just too heavy. And now all of a sudden, all these other folks were having their daily productivity levels dip because they were able to access YouTube instead. But like all, so it's connected to all of that. It has a massive impact on the total experience. So part of it is, trying to tie it back to that. One of the first things, if any company is trying to look into perf, I always try to advise, like, first get something out there where you're actually able to see where you are today. You want it to be as real world as possible. It's important not to test on your own machine over a cable connection on a souped up MacBook Pro. Like that's not what your users are experiencing, right? That's going to give you the best of the best results. That's useless information. You need to find out what they're looking at. You need to stress test it. Throw it under high throttling, low powered machines. That's the way to find the actual issues. And then you need to see what you can do upfront to tie it to something business related, because if you want any momentum in your organization, you have to be able to show that, hey, look, it's actually impacting users. And when we fix this, it actually helps our organization, our business metrics, something. Because if you can't do that, it's going to be hard to continue to allocate resources to performance tools or people in the organization going forward.
Let me get your opinion about something. I work a lot of organizations, and some of them feel that, the whole concept of perceived performance is easier than actual performance. This is the concept of lazy loading things in. So this way customers think that it's there, and then they kind of load in things over time, and they feed things in there. They load the skeleton of the page, and then they load things under the covers. And I see this a lot in large web applications out there. Some of the biggest enterprise applications out there in the world today do this. And they do this because they don't want to go in and, like you were saying, fine tune things, maybe because they don't have the data, maybe because they don't understand how to do it. Do you see this a lot with a lot of organizations?
Yeah. So, man, you're going to make me bust out the soapbox here pretty quick, aren't you? So first, let me say, when 5 years ago, when perceived performance really was starting to get popular as a topic, it was starting to emerge in a lot of blog posts and talks and stuff like that. I was all in on it. I think there's a lot that can be done to make things feel faster. And if you carefully apply those things, there's a really solid use case for it. So one of the patterns you see a lot, we call these the skeleton screens, right? So if you've ever gone to, it's usually a JavaScript heavy site. You go to it and maybe you see the little gray boxes and a few maybe some dummy text, and then the content kind of populates on top of it, right? It sort of replaced the spinner pages from, decades ago or whatever. Not even decades ago, unfortunately. But those skeleton pages, those were one of those things. The funny thing is the origin story of that comes from a native app called Polar. And Luke Wroblewski was the person who had, started Polar. It was this mini native app where, the whole use case was you just had A or B, two photos, and it was a question and you'd quickly do it. It was all about micro interactions. How quick could you do it? And what they found is that they had some limiting constraints on the network that were causing sometimes some delays. And so they played with these skeleton screens and found out that people thought it felt a lot faster. But the key to the whole, so he wrote this post about it and it kind of took off. Everybody started jumping on the skeleton screens, but we lost track of what perceived performance was meant to do in the first place. If you go back to that first conversation, that first post that he's having about it, they had done everything they could. They had optimized the heck out of this thing. They'd made sure that it was lightweight. They had optimized the network calls. They just ran into a natural constraint of running something on a mobile device, which is that occasionally you're going to get a slow network. And they're like, well, what can we do to make that experience better? And then they would, try to populate it with as much real data as possible up front and just load in a few pieces after. Now, fast forward today, and when you see that pattern, it's usually there's nothing there except for a few boxes. And it sits there because the reality is people are using it, like you said, to sort of mask the actual issue. So it's a bummer because, again, I think perceived performance matters. I think it's actually a very useful technique when it's applied, but you can't use it to pretend that you don't have actual performance issues. You have to address those because, the perceived performance stuff isn't going to mask that. And you're still, if you have those underlying issues, all it's going to take is one slow network call or one person on an underpowered device, whatever it is, and they're going to suffer through this really slow behind the scenes experience. And nothing that you do from a perceived performance impact is going to help at all. It's just going to frustrate at that point.
Great information. I do want to bring my co-host back in a moment. I do have one more question, and this kind of steps into what Catchpoint is doing in some of the spaces. And a lot of this is making sure that organizations can do more proactive testing and verification of their, the performance of their site. Now, you have some pretty cool tools. I've actually used them myself, web page test being one of them. Can you tell us, Lemmy, a little bit about what they're doing, how they're helping organizations in this space?
Yeah. So, Catchpoint is just massively comprehensive in terms of the number of products and the different angles that we can tell you about performance impacts, right? We can get down to tell you that, look, there's an outage on Verizon networks in Boston. We can go down to that level of the network stack. And then with web page test, we can go extremely comprehensive on the front end. And so we have all these different data points. But as I said before, one of the things that I think is really important is making sure that there's action there, something you can do about it. Like, what's that next step? When I'd consult with organizations, often I'd come in and they'd have some sort of performance monitoring or tooling in place. But what you'd hear often was a couple things. First off, maybe they'd try to do some performance work on their own. And maybe they even sunk months of work into it in a couple of situations and saw no return on their efforts. And that was frustrating. And that completely derails any chance you have of developing a performance culture. The other bit is if they'd have these monitoring products in place. And, if the data didn't look good or the data, you had a blip or a spike or something, they would do their due diligence. They'd try to figure out why. But when they couldn't explain it, like it wasn't clear why the data regressed, or it wasn't clear why this tool was showing very different results than Lighthouse run in Chrome on their own machine, they start to lose trust in the monitoring product. So one of the biggest things that I think is really, really important to do, and we've got a couple concrete examples with web page tests in the last year, is really closing that gap between something's going on to here's the solution to it. So for web page tests, that was kind of the catalyst for one of the big features we launched last year is experiments, these no-code experiments. So the idea is you run web page test. It'll tell you, it'll grab all the performance data that's always done. But then we'll have our own set of opportunities. These are things where we're like, okay, if this optimization tends to work, you have some render blocking resources, you're loading something that's a single point of failure and it could bring down your site. These are suggestions, and that's great. But then the next step is, okay, as a developer, as a team, and I see these things, I need to understand, is it worth my time? And so that's where the experimentation came in. What we do is we're using some cloud, edge workers and stuff like that, edge computing, to be able to proxy the site on an experimentation run. And then we apply those optimizations on the fly. And then we spit out results at the end. So the idea is, let's say, you've got a third-party script. It's blocking the render of the page. We think it's going to slow things down. You click a button, says, to make sure that it doesn't block, run the experiment. And at the end of it, you can see exactly like, hey, on a 3G network, it looks like this saves you 1.5 seconds. Or sometimes it's, we applied the optimization. It didn't save you any time. And that's useful information too, because then you're not wasting 6 months chasing it down. Right. But it's really about what can we do to close that gap between something's going on to knowing how to fix it and whether or not you should spend time on it.
It's fantastic. These are some tedious things that you do over time, and these types of tools definitely reduce that barrier for people. So great stuff. I do want to bring my co-host back in, but before we do have to thank another great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's Worldwide Technology. And the WWT is at the forefront of innovation, working with clients all over the world to transform their businesses. And now at the heart of WWT lies their Advanced Technology Center, or ATC. Now, the ATC is a research and testing lab that brings together technologies from leading OEMs. There's more than $500 million in equipment invested in the lab. The ATC offers hundreds of on-demand and schedulable labs featuring solutions that include technologies representing the newest advances in cloud, security, networking, primary and secondary storage, data analytics, and AI, DevOps, and so much more. WWT's engineers and partners use the ATC to quickly spin up proofs of concept and pilots so customers can confidently select the best solution. Now, this helps cut evaluation time from months to weeks. Now, with the ATC, you can test out products and solutions before you go to market, access technical articles, expert insights, demonstration videos, white papers, hands-on labs, and other tools that help you stay up to date with the latest technology. Not only is the ATC a physical lab space, but WWT has also virtualized it. That's right. Members of the ATC platform can access these amazing resources anywhere in the world, 365 days a year. Now, while exploring the ATC platform, make sure you check out WWT's events and communities for more opportunities to learn about technology trends and hear the latest research and insights from their experts. Whatever your business needs, WWT can deliver scalable, tried and tested, tailored solutions. WWT brings strategy and execution together to make a new world happen. To learn more about WWT, the ATC, and gain access to all their free resources, visit wwt.com/twit and create a free account on their ATC platform. That's wwt.com/twit. And we thank WWT for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, we've been talking with Tim Kadlec. He's Director of Engineering at Catchpoint. We talk a lot about performance here, but I do want to bring my co-host back in because they're chomping at the bit here. They have lots to ask. Curtis, I want to throw to Brian Chee first. Sorry. I'll throw to Brian Chee first because I think he has some questions. Brian?
Well, I'm going to say Kurt and I were doing some amazing work probably about 10, 15 years ago for, in those days, different magazines, and eventually we kind of converged. And the whole idea was we wanted to go and create what-if scenarios to be able to go and do testing. I would actually borrow statistics from various large corporations and build simulations. Well, one of the tools I used to use was WebLoad and WebMint from Mercury Interactive. You know, I see Tim nodding his head. Almost everybody's heard of them, but it was a really, really complex system and almost required a computer science degree to really get the instrumentation to work. Now, I put that into what I call proactive testing, whereas instrumentation, where you're finding out the performance of pages that have been built, that's more reactive testing. So let's go and drag up some dirty laundry from the U.S. federal government. Healthcare.gov, when it first opened, it had one heck of a meltdown. Now, if these cool tools for proactive testing had existed, what kinds of things could the healthcare.gov team have done to try and prevent that meltdown?
That was a bit of a classic meltdown, for sure. Yeah, to be fair, I do think there probably were some tools available that they may have been able to take advantage of. I know there was a lot more that was happening there in terms of trying to rush that out and stuff that probably, meant that they kind of bypassed that, which is an issue. I'm sure you're very familiar with that, Brian, with all the work that you were doing back there too, is just like, making sure that performance isn't an afterthought, but is something that you're actually prioritizing and baking in from the start. That was step number one, probably, right? Making sure that they treated it that way as a first consideration around the experience of their product. But yeah, I mean, they had, there was a lot of it was just load testing related, if I recall correctly. There were some front end issues, like there was a lot of heavy stuff on that. Again, if you're running that through a tool that would have, ahead of time doing that proactive testing that you talked about, it absolutely would have been able to surface, hey, there's a lot of stuff going on here. There's a lot of server load. There's a lot of front end weight being sent down on the page. Like, and all of this is going to be bad. So I'm not sure if, I never got the behind the scenes story. So I do not know if it was a matter of, they didn't test at all, or they tested, but they didn't test at scale, or under real enough considerations, or, what the deal was there. But it is a perfect classic example of why, that proactive testing and being on top of it and, checking that throughout before you're ever hitting production is absolutely critical, because when you don't do it, the impact can be catastrophic, as they learned.
Yeah. And
that was a taint that they never got rid of that stain, really. Like, I know there's like, look, it's anytime it's politics, there's always going to be stuff, right? But like that launch haunted that entire thing for quite a while.
Oh, yeah. Well, and flipping the coin, actually, testing has more than just a performance aspect to it. One of my favorite hacks for Apache was, let's just ramp up the authentication against HT access and see how fast I can crash it. Being able to test things like authentication, making sure that a system doesn't let you have access to something that you don't have the rights to, is all part of testing. And so I got to imagine web page test has some components. They're I remember playing with all kinds of really cool widgets and literally having table-driven choices and also a database-driven choice so that I could pretend I'm a user. Those tools have existed for a long time. And even though the tools I used were really expensive, web page test is not as expensive as a lot of people think. And the excuse of I can't afford it isn't there anymore, is it?
No, it's definitely priced in a range for, if you want to get started rolling with web page test, there's a free tier, but there's also a tier that I think starts at $15 a month. It's up. You can afford $15 a month if you're an enterprise for sure. At least to kind of kick the tires and do at least a little bit of the testing on there. But you're right, like it's not just perf. And even from the facet of web page test, we've kind of expanded into a few different areas. Like web page test started in 2008. Pat Meenan built it when he was at AOL because they needed a perf tool. So it's always had a hardcore performance focus. But we found out that, we had the ability to help people do the right thing when it comes to performance. So why not try it on a few other things? So there is some built-in security testing. We do some checks around security headers. We do some checks around, different vulnerabilities. We actually tap into the Sneak database to see if there's any vulnerable client-side, components being used. There's actually some accessibility testing that we provide as well. We run an accessibility audit on every single test to see how you're stacking up against those guidelines. We actually have the ability to grab the entire accessibility object model that the browser uses under the hood. We are starting to look at what can we do to encourage just a healthier website in general and not just limit it to perf, because you're right, all of that stuff matters. And I don't know what your experience is, but mine has definitely been the more manual that testing process is, the more likely it is for things to be missed. And so when there's an opportunity to automate it, when there's an opportunity to make it just part of something that happens without somebody remembering to go do that, you've got to take advantage of it.
Well, now we say that we've got to take advantage of it, but now I've got to say I have heard a lot of managers point over at their Agile development methods handbooks and say, we've got to kick it out. We're going to sprint. We're going to kick it out. The users will let us know if there's a problem. Is there an economic reason to build testing in rather than just letting our users, they'll tell us if there's something they don't like? Why should we spend even a small amount of money and, more important, development time on testing when our users will do it for us?
That is I've heard that before. So first off, I think there's mountains of studies at this point that show that when the performance is out there, it does have a negative impact on everything. It'll, there's concrete percentages, concrete dollar amounts. I think several large companies along the Amazon, Walmart, trying to remember the third. There's 3 companies that all found 100 milliseconds could make a dramatic difference, like $1 million plus in AR just from that 100 millisecond difference. And now that's fine. That's good. Being able to demonstrate that there is that economic interest in doing this is important. But I think more specific to this question, it's why care about it up front, right? Why not let the users figure it out and then we solve it later? And my favorite study on this is one that Google had done, where they, it's Google. So they get to do all sorts of those crazy experiments that the rest of us would never, why? But they did one experiment where they slowed down, artificially slowed down search results. They wanted to see what impact it had. And it was a negligible amount, again, in the hundreds of milliseconds. I don't remember what it was. It wasn't significant. But they did this study. They served up basically to a large chunk of their users the search results as it was, and then to another chunk search results with this little artificial slowdown. And sure enough, they found that artificially slowing it down meant less engagement. People were less likely to dig deeper in the search results. They were less likely to click through. Their engagement metrics went down like you would have expected based on everything else we've ever seen related to this. That's not the interesting part. The interesting part is after. So they removed the delay. So they brought the speed back up to par. So everybody's getting the same experience now. What they found out was that the people who had that initial slow experience continued to interact less with Google for months after that. And eventually it corrected. Eventually they got back to parity in terms of what the other cohort of users was doing. But it was a several month thing where people were just not engaged as much because that initial experience had left a bad taste on their tongue. And so it took a long time to recover from that. So could we rush something out with our agile, sprints, get something out, and then yes, wait and see what the users say and then try to tweak it after? Absolutely, we could. We know that during that period, until the user discovers that, we're going to be hurting our revenue numbers and our conversion numbers. But we also know that even after that, it's going to take a while for that initial experience that they've had to get better, to fade out of their hand. It's the whole, you only get one chance to make a good first impression. That absolutely holds true with user experience. Well, so yeah, it's risky to do that for sure. You're literally giving away money when you make that option.
I like that, because no one likes to give away money.
No, I don't think so. No.
If you are doing the testing, you've talked about building it in. How thoroughly do you have to integrate, the test vendor, with all of the other development infrastructure out there, with the ticketing, with the entire way of dealing with the problems that you surface through the testing? Are you integrating with all of, with Jira, with all of the ticketing companies, or do you find that it's best for testing to stand alone? How does that work?
That's a great question. I'm a huge, you have to integrate. And I'll explain. So we do, first off, both Catchpoint, all the products offered by Catchpoint, as well as webpage test specifically, there are different integrations available, some issue trackers, some things like GitHub and stuff like that, a lot of CI/CD processes. That's a very common point of wanting to integrate with your monitoring tool, so that you can automate performance testing when you submit a pull request, for example, immediately check what the perf impact is. Our issue trackers it's a great idea, a great point of integration, because then you can see an issue in your monitoring tool and immediately file that off to an issue tracker somewhere so that your team can deal with it. Those integration points matter a lot, because what happens otherwise is performance becomes a thing that the select few who use the monitor, have access to the monitoring tool, continue to use the monitoring tool and check into the monitoring tool to go see what's going on a regular basis. Those are the people who are going to catch things. And that's a small group, and it's probably a group that's going to shrink over time, because you're making them leave their workflow. You're making them leave the tools that they're using every day throughout the rest of their day to go check this one experience. Now, if you've got it connected, on the other hand, if you've got this tight integration with an issue tracker, if you've got it set up so that when, whether you're using Jenkins or GitHub or whatever it is, when you're making a deploy or you're putting a pull request, you're automatically checking performance and then getting the results right there in that build process or in that PR approval process. Now the performance information is coming to where the engineers, where the developers are, pushing it off to Slack, where teams are already communicating in other ways. These integration points matter because now they're not having to go out and find this information. It's getting back to that proactive versus reactive to some extent, right? We're proactively inserting this information where they are. And so, yeah, I think that's absolutely critical. And honestly, if you're not doing that, as an organization taking advantage of your tools that way, or as a vendor not making a point to prioritize that, you're basically condemning that tool to kind of sit off in a corner. And I guarantee over time, it's, people just aren't going to use it as much because they're going to have to go out of their day-to-day workflow to get there.
Tim, I love this space. I could talk for hours about it. Really great audience.
You and me both.
Great information today. Thanks so much for being here. Time flies when you're having fun. Since we're running low on time, I wanted to give you maybe a chance to tell the folks at home where they can learn more about Catchpoint, where they can go to get more information about it, maybe even get started on it.
Yeah. So best place for Catchpoint is catchpoint.com. There's also a blog at Catchpoint that you can check out where there's a lot of good information that gets posted. A lot of really good technical and deep technical insights as well. It's not just all marketing stuff. Webpage Test itself also has its own separate site, webpagetest.org. And there's also a blog for Webpage Test. That's much more centered on the front end performance specifically at the moment. But yeah, both of those are great resources to learn more. We also do, from the front end performance space, if you're interested, we actually also do a fairly frequent Webpage Test live over on Twitch, where we'll have guests on sometimes to interview them about, we just had Nick Jansma on talking about, a new RUM archive project that they're working on over at Akamai. But then other times it's live audits. So there's a number of different resources to kind of dig in.
Fantastic. Well, folks, you've done it again. You sat through another hour of the best dang enterprise and IT podcast in the universe. So definitely tune your podcatcher to TWiT. I want to thank everyone who makes this show possible, especially to my co-host, starting their very own Mr. Brian Chee. Cheebert, what's going on for you in the coming weeks, and where can people find you?
I'm getting ready for the Central Florida Fair. I'm also thinking I need to go and start building some electric carts. I must have toys, and I'm retired. What's not to like about building stuff, Anyway, I've been throwing up all kinds of ideas, and I'm not sure I'm ever going to do it, but it's fun talking about them. And I do a lot of that on Twitter. My Twitter handle is ADVNETLAB, Advanced Net Lab. And people throw ideas at me. Sometimes people throw some flames at me because they don't agree, but that's all right. I don't mind people not agreeing with me. This is a free country, and I like to hear contrary opinions. But you're also welcome to throw email at me. My email address is Cheebert, spelled CheeBert @twit.tv. You can also send email to TWiT@twit.tv, and that'll hit all the hosts. We've got lots of interesting guests and interesting topics. I've been trying to fulfill the threads that you folks have been suggesting, and I think I'm going to make some of you very, very happy in the coming weeks. Take care and stay safe.
Thank you, Cheebert. Well, we also have to thank our very own Mr. Curtis Franklin. Curtis, it's great to have you here. Thanks so much for being here. Can you tell the folks where they can find you and all your work?
Well, you can always find me on Twitter. I'm at KG4GWA. I'm also over on Mastodon, KG4GWA at mastodon.sdf.org. I'm on LinkedIn, Curtis Franklin. I'm just all over the place. You're welcome to follow me, contact me, hit me up with messages on any or all of those. I'd love to hear from people and would love it if we got together in person at one of the conferences I'm going to be attending. There's Enterprise Connect coming up in March. There's RSA conference coming up in April. And believe it or not, I'm already starting to think about my presentation at Black Hat in August in beautiful Las Vegas. So let me know. Love to hear from members of the TWiT Riot.
Thanks, Curtis. Well, we also have to thank you as well. You're the person who drops in each and every week to watch and to listen to our show to get your enterprise and IT goodness. I want to make it easy for you to catch up and listen about your enterprise and IT news right now. Go to our show page, twit.tv/TWiT. There you'll find all the amazing back episodes, the show notes, the co-host information, the guest information, of course, the links of the stories that we do during the show. But more importantly, there you'll see those helpful subscribe and download links right there next to the video. Support the show by getting your audio version, your video version of your choice. Listen on any one of your devices, any one of your podcast applications, because we're on all of them. So subscribing definitely supports the show. Now, you might also heard we also have Club TWiT as well. That's right. It's a members only ad-free podcast service with a bonus TWiT Plus feed that you can't get anywhere else. And it's only $7 a month. That's right. There's a lot of great things that come with Club TWiT, but one of them is exclusive access to the members only Discord server. I'm on it right now. There's You can chat with hosts, you can chat with producers, you can have separate discussion channels, lots of great ones in there. Plus, they also have special events. That's right. Join in on those for sure. Lots of fun discussions, lots of channels. So definitely join Club Twit. Be part of that movement. Go to twit.tv/Club Twit. Now, don't forget as well, Club Twit offers group or corporate group plans as well. That's right. It's a great way to give your team access to our ad-free tech podcast. The plans start with 5 members at a discounted rate of $6 each per month. And you can add as many seats as you like there. And this is really a great way for your IT department, your sales department, your developers, your tech teams to stay up to date with access to all of our podcasts. And just like regular memberships, they can join the Twit Discord server as well and get the Twit Plus bonus feed. Just join Club Twit at twit.tv/Club Twit. Now, after you subscribe, I want you to impress your friends, your family, your coworkers with the gift of TWiT, because we talk a lot about some fun tech topics on the show, and I guarantee they will find it fun and interesting as well. So have them subscribe. Now, if you've already subscribed, we do the show live. That's right, 1:30 p.m. Pacific on Friday. We're doing it live right now. You can go to live.twit.tv. You can see the stream. You can come see how the pizza's made, all the show stuff behind the scenes, before and after, all the banter, all the fun we have here at Twit. Definitely join the live stream at live.twit.tv. And if you're going to watch the show live, you got to jump into the IRC channel as well. Go to irc.twit.tv. We love the chat room. We have a lot of great discussions, a lot of great characters in there each and every week. So we thank you for them being there and being part of the movement. So definitely check out our IRC, irc.twit.tv. Now, I definitely want you to hit me up. I'm on Twitter at twitter.com/LewMM. There I post all my enterprise tidbits. I'm on Mastodon, LewMM at twit.social. You can direct message me. You can hit me up with just messages in the channels. Feel free to do that. I love having conversations with all of you. So definitely, whether it's show ideas or whatever, automation, I don't care. Hit me up with there. If you want to know what I do during my normal work week at Microsoft, definitely check developers.microsoft.com/office. There we post the latest and greatest ways for you to make your office more productive for you. I want to thank everyone who makes this show possible, especially to Leo and Lisa. They continue to support This Week in Enterprise Tech each and every week, and we couldn't do the show without them. So thank you for all your support over the years. I want to thank all the staff and engineers at TWiT. And I also want to thank Mr. Brian Chee one more time. He's not only our co-host, but he's also our tireless producer. He does all the bookings and the plannings before the show, so we couldn't do the show without him. So thank you, Chee, for all your support. And before we sign out, we have to thank our editor for today, because they make us look good after the fact. They cut all my mistakes out. So thank you for making me look good. And of course, we have to thank our technical director for today, Mr. Emperor. He's the talented Mr. Emperor, because he does an amazing show on TWiT called Hands-On Photography, which I learn each and every week. In fact, the lighting I have in this room is because of that show. So, Ant, what's going on this week? I want to learn some stuff.
Mr. Lou, that's pretty funny. Thank you so much. And yes, your lighting looks pretty daggum awesome, sir. This week on Hands-On Photography, we talked about changing color in objects again, but this time it is with video. So if you want to change the color of something in your video, there is a way to do that. And I show an example of me just changing my shirt from one color to the other. So check it out, twit.tv/HOP.
Love it. Thank you, Ant. Well, until next time, I'm Louis Maresca, just reminding you, if you want to know what's going on in the enterprise, just keep quiet.
Hey, I'm Rod Pyle, Editor-in-Chief of Ad Astra Magazine, and each week I join with my co-host to bring you This Week in Space, the latest and greatest news from the final frontier. We talk to NASA chiefs, space scientists, engineers, educators, and artists, and sometimes we just shoot the breeze over what's hot and what's not in space, books, and TV. And we do it all for you, our fellow true believers. So whether you're an armchair adventurer or waiting for your turn to grab a slot in Elon's Mars rocket, join us on This Week in Space and be part of the greatest adventure of all time.